Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Allplane podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. Before we dive into today's conversation, I would like to remind you that all previous episodes of this podcast, along with many other interesting stories about innovation and sustainability in aviation, are available on the Allplane website at Allplane.tv, ALLPLANE.tv. And I would also like to invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, which focuses on sustainability in the aviation industry. You can find the subscription link right on our website. Now let's get into today's episode. Today we are revisiting a topic that to many may sound a little bit like retro-futurism, but it is actually very close to being a real thing and actually pretty high-tech. I'm talking about airships. This is not the first time that we cover the renaissance of airships on this podcast. We had an episode long ago about a British airship developer called Hybrid Air Vehicles. And today we are going to view another interesting player in this space, also based in the UK, that is called Straighline Aviation. However, Straighline Aviation does not intend to build airships, but to operate them. Our three guests today, today we have exceptionally three guests on the pod, are Mike Kendrick, Mark Dorey, and James Dexter, who between them accumulate decades of experience in the field of lighter-than-air vehicles. They will provide more details about this project in our conversation, but just to illustrate this point, I will say that, for example, in the 1980s, they ran the largest airship and balloon company in the world, in partnership with none other than Richard Branson and the Virgin Group. So today we're going to talk about how Mike, Mark, and James are preparing the comeback of airship commercial air cargo services. And they plan to do that with a new generation of airships that was developed originally by Lockheed Martin. And since 2023, work on this modern airship actually has been carried out by a spin-off of Lockheed Martin called AT² Aerospace. This airship, which is called Z1, has a number of truly innovative features, notably one that is called the Air Cushion Landing System, ACLS. We'll soon hear more about what this is about. But for now, let's say that this is a technology that allows the airship to operate in environments that were until now denied to earlier types of airship. For example, this airship that Straightline Aviation is planning to use will be able to land pretty much in any large empty space, opening up opportunities for air cargo transportation in places where there's virtually no land infrastructure. Our three guests today will share their plans to launch this air cargo operator based on these lighter-than-air vehicles, and will also comment on the environmental aspects of this technology, which promises to deliver very low fuel consumption levels. We'll also talk about a number of other technical and historical considerations that are relevant for the comeback of the airship today. And no need to say that all three guests will show their deep experience-based knowledge in this field. What's more, Straightline Aviation is also preparing a non-stop around-the-world airship flight. This will take place in the near future. So tune in to learn more about Straightline Aviation's plans to bring back the airship. And without further ado, let me welcome our guests to the podcast. Hello, how are you?
Oh, good, thanks.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Well, today we have a bit of a special episode because it's not just one person, but we have a whole team, the team of Straightline Aviation. And you are working in basically in an area of aviation that I think it's very interesting because it seems that after many decades, there's a renewed interest in lighter-than-air vehicles and, well, what's commonly known as airships. And Straightline Aviation is active in this field. Tell us a bit more about Straightline Aviation.
Okay, well, I'm Mike Kendrick. I'm the chairman of Straightline Aviation. Mark?
Yeah, Mark Dorey, CEO. James Dexter, the Director of Operations.
Perfect. What can you tell us about Straightline Aviation? Because I think, there's a lot of talk now about airships. And there are a few projects, including hybrid air vehicles. In the US, we have the founder of Google, for example, investing in LTA. And there are a few other projects as well, some of them unmanned for things like, for example, power line inspections or to carry cargo. But you've been in this industry for quite some time, right? Tell us a bit more about how you started and where you got your interest in airships from.
Okay, well, we started this business many years ago, 30 or 35 years ago, and we were involved in hot air balloons, but always a desire of mine was to move into airships. And as early as 1972, I was investigating the feasibility of flying around the world in an airship. So I had a company called Lighter Than Air Limited, and we ran commercial balloons. And then I was basically headhunted by Richard Branson, and we formed Virgin ABC, Virgin Airship and Balloon Company. And Richard and I became partners for 26 years, I think it was. We moved naturally into airships, and without going into immense detail, we were quite well known because we did major projects, and we headed up Richard's flight across the Atlantic and his flight across the Pacific and his attempt to go around the world, all in balloons. But we were always very keen on airships, and eventually we bought a controlling interest in American Blimp, which made small advertising aircraft. And so the sort of things you saw like MetLife and Goodyear and that sort of. And there were only 2 airships commercially working when we came into the business. And I think one was for the Whale in, what was his name? Shamu.
Shamu, yeah.
And the other was, no, not Budweiser, was in there.
The Goodyear airships.
Yeah, no, it was WHL, I think it was called.
WDL.
Yeah. So anyway, there were only 2 airships functioning in the world. So we sort of disrupted the industry, and Mark came on board very early, and so did Jim, and we grew that company to become the largest fleet of airships the world's ever seen. We had 19 airships, and we operated in 38 different countries, completely disrupting and relaunching a new era in the business of commercial airships. It was hugely successful. We became the largest aerial advertising company on the planet. As I said, operating in 35 countries. So we well travelled, and by doing extraordinary things, including in Barcelona, where you're sitting, where we took Richard Branson water skiing behind one of our airships, and we did all that kind of stuff. We were an advertising and marketing agency, and we did things that the big significant thing that we did that took us into this super company status was that we understood the value of the advertising and the public image of the airship. And so we actually put cameras, which the client paid for, on board the major publicity events in the world, like the Super Bowl, things like that. And they ran cameras throughout the period of a game, and we gave them the air-to-ground shots free on the basis that they looked at the airship twice an hour, sometimes 3 an hour, and said thank you for these, Budweiser airship and all that kind of stuff. That's what really made it, because then the client could measure the effectiveness and the value by TV time and press time and stuff like that. And it was enormously successful because we reduced the cost of audience impact over regular TV and press advertising by a factor of more than 10. And that is purely why it became so successful. Extraordinary things to catch the eye of people, like water skiing with Richard, lots of events like that, creating world records, and doing episodes of Friends and Baywatch and that kind of stuff. So that's how we got into business.
And were these airships, were they manned? There was someone in the cockpit there, or they were autonomous?
Quite often, Jim.
Yeah,
they're piloted. They're type certified, FAA type certified aircraft for day-night VFR operation. They're quite capable.
Mm-hmm.
They're the blimps you see flying over events. They're piloted.
Okay. And are you still running this fleet, or what
No,
happened to
no.
that fleet?
What happened, Miguel? Tragically, 9/11 came along, and of course that grounded general aviation completely. We had hundreds of people sitting in fields with airships unable to fly all over the world. And at the same time, in the UK, we had foot and mouth control, which was a problem. It means we couldn't even fly balloons because we couldn't land in Farmers Field. So reluctantly, we had to not we didn't go bankrupt or anything, but it was obviously unsustainable. So we decided to sell the company on back to the American blimp, the manufacturers of the aircraft that we flew. So it was very sad, but Mark and I, in the meantime, had our eye on a particular aircraft called the Sky Kitten, and we went to see it, and it was very much a miniature version of. Can you move that airship over? It was a miniature version of this airship, which I hope you can see.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the people that might be listening to us cannot see it, but I'm gonna try post images on the show notes so that people can get an idea how it looks
Right.
like.
Well, it's like two airships
Hmm.
strapped together side by side.
Hmm.
And the innovation, the reason why there's two strapped side to side is because you get very good lift from what is actually a flying wing, an enormous flying wing, but a flying wing nevertheless. And it's filled with helium. It doesn't have any infrastructure inside. One of the biggest problems associated with large airships, as you probably know, is they are all, apart from the one being manufactured by Lockheed Martin and its spin-off, they are all totally dependent on securing and mooring to a mast. And you've seen those masts on the ground with airships that are such. In fact, the
Yeah.
Empire, the Empire State Building at at a mast.
Yes.
And so while they're great and comfortable to fly in, landing and mooring to a mast is a difficult thing to do because it weather kites around the mast in the wind, and therefore getting people on and off safely has always been a problem. So when
Hmm.
we saw this airship called the Sky Kitten, and they're called the Z1, which is the Lockheed Martin derivative. Mark and I believed in the technology immediately because it didn't have to use a tower or a mooring mast, and it had an innovation called the air cushion landing system, and basically underneath the aircraft is three hovercrafts. And so when you bring the aircraft down, you don't attach it to a tower or a mooring mast. It sits on the ground, and you reverse the thrust of the hovercrafts that's keeping it sort of inches above the ground. You reverse the thrust that actually sucks it onto the ground and holds it there very steady. Completely innovative, a complete revolution. And Mark and I believe from the moment we saw it that was the way to go. And we believed in it. It was invented, supposedly, there's some confusion or disagreement about this, but it was the air cushion landing system, it seemed to us, was invented by a British guy, as was the hovercraft, by the way. Although that is in dispute, a couple of people.
Yeah, it happens often. There are like people doing things in parallel and they come up
Yeah.
with the similar ideas.
Well, nobody had, that's the point. Nobody had, and Lockheed, being a big, powerful company, immediately patented the idea. And for us, because all lighter than air aircraft are subject to weather more than any other aircraft, we don't think this is any more subject to weather, the Lockheed Martin aircraft, than any other aircraft is. It can fly in fact, it's often less subject to weather than other aircraft. Although we were convinced of it, of course, it's taken from now, which was from then, which was how long ago, Mark?
20 odd years ago now.
20 years ago. It's taken from now until then to become a reality, Miguel. So, and it's not quite there yet, because we haven't delivered one.
I wanted to ask you about this. What time frame are we talking about here? When did you come across this? What was at the time, I guess, I don't know if it's still the case, a novel concept? What was the approximate time frame we're talking about?
Yeah, so the Sky Kitten first flew, I think, Kim, you're correct, is it 2000? It was around about the year 2000, wasn't it, in Bedford? I think a bit later. Was it a bit? It wouldn't have been much later. I mean, if it was by a few months. But anyway, so we're talking 20 odd years ago. And so Roger Monk's company metamorphosized into HAB, who you say you've already spoken to, and they're following their path here in the UK. Lockheed spent a lot of money on a competitive program over in the US, and have passed on the intellectual property to a group called AT², who are now commercializing what they developed. And Jim, you were with Northrop Grumman working with HAB, weren't you, at the time when they developed their full-size aircraft for the military? That's right.
So the HAV concept is based on the same Lockheed Martin patent?
No, well, that's where it gets a little confusing, and there are competing claims over, as Mike said, who invented the technology, where and how, and who has the rights over. But that's all been settled. But yeah, the Lockheed Martin ran, I think, more with the ACLS concept than others have.
Yeah, the original Northrop Grumman aircraft metamorphosed into HAV still runs on a tower. So
they don't have the ACLS system.
They don't. No one else has it.
They don't have the ability to stabilize on the ground.
So can you tell me about your business model? You are working with the manufacturers to establish an operation that will use these airships for what sort of mission? So what's the business model and how you plan to deploy these aircraft?
Let me talk you through that. So first thing to point out is we are an operator of airships. We're not a designer, and we are OEM agnostic. We don't mind what technology comes to the fore. What we're obviously most interested in is that the technology is operationally feasible and serves a commercial market. So we've worked with and talked to a huge number of airship manufacturers, some of whom you already mentioned, dotted around the world with many different design concepts. And there are almost as many different design concepts as there are people supporting them. But
if I may interject, I think it's worth saying that we're known to be the most successful operator that has existed. So it was natural for all of the other OEMs to come to see us or make contact with us. So we've reviewed, I think, probably every other system, Mark.
Certainly every credible system.
Yeah.
I would like to make a technical question from the point of view of someone that has been following this space, but I'm not an expert in airships by any means. I would like to ask, and I think that could be interesting for the audience as well, what is the difference between an airship, a lighter than air vehicle, and a blimp? Are they all the same thing, or are they subcategories of
do you want to go through that? Also, it'd be worth talking about the difference between a hybrid airship and the conventional airship. Well, there are four types of airship. The conventional is the cylindrical airship. It's a single hull, and there are three different design types. There's the non-rigid, the semi-rigid, and the rigid.
All three designs are versions of the conventional type, right?
Yes, they are.
And these would be the classical kind of 1920s
cigar
design.
shape.
Yeah.
Cigar
Okay.
shape.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the design type, the non-rigid, the semi-rigid, and the rigid refer to the structure that they use to state this, to provide the integrity of the ship. The non-rigid airship is affectionately known as a blimp, and that relies on, that has no structure. It's just an envelope, and it relies on internal pressurization to maintain shape. Now it's got a ballonnet inside, it's an airbag, and it allows the airship to ascend and descend with changing atmospheric pressure, which changes the volume of the lifting gas you're carrying. You have to have a ballonnet filled with air on the surface, and when you go up in altitude and the helium expands with the decreasing air pressure, the ballonnet compensates for that. Air is vented out of the ballonnet as you ascend. When you descend, when you come back to the earth, air is reintroduced into the ballonnet, and that serves to maintain pressure as it goes up and down. Now, the three different types, I believe, were designed due to the size restrictions at the time. The semi-rigid airships had a keel running from nose to tail, so they could build longer airships. Because the non-rigid would have a bending moment, or they couldn't build them too long because of the bending moment. So the keel provided this longitudinal stability for them to build a longer airship. A famous semi-rigid airship was the Norge and the Italia that flew to the North Pole. That was a classic semi-rigid airship. The rigid airships are what we know as the Zeppelins. They have a rigid framework running the entire length of the ship, and the framework is clad with fabric, and so the gas cells that provide the lift are placed inside that frame.
You mentioned four types.
Well, the hybrid, I'm calling the fourth type because it is
Okay.
a lifting body. It's basically the width of two airships.
Yeah.
To create the, as Mike mentioned, the flying wing, if you will.
Okay.
Creates much more aerodynamic lift.
Okay. So we would have three types of conventional airship, and then the hybrid, which is this more modern approach that makes it possible, for example, to land on the ground and embark and disembark people straight from land, from the ground.
And the very significant point about that, Miguel, is that it doesn't need a runway or a control or a tower to moor it to. So you don't need an airport, and you don't have infrastructure on the ground. It's because some of the remote places, of course, if you were to use a ship that needed a mast, you would have to put the mast in before you operated from there. So this airship, the Z1, is capable of landing in a very small area, unprepared land, or on water, practically any surface, and it's been tested.
You need some space though, because the hybrid air vehicles airship, for example, I think it's going to be the largest flying vehicle in the world, I think.
That boils down to the static weight, the heaviness that the aircraft is operated at. There's conventional airships. They operate close to equilibrium. Their static weight is not very heavy. Their static weight is driven by the ability to create aerodynamic lift. But when you're taking off, you have to generate enough aerodynamic lift to carry the weight that you're flying with.
Okay.
And so conventional airships are limited. Like the Goodyear blimp, the maximum static weight is 800 pounds. They had to demonstrate that in flight testing to show that they could safely get a pilot of average skill could get off the ground at that weight. Now that drives endurance, how much fuel you can carry, and payload, and basically the capability of the aircraft. So the hybrid with this wide lifting body can create much more aerodynamic lift. Like the hybrid Z1
will be able to take off with 15,000 pounds of static. So that gives it the capability to carry cargo, carry much more weight.
And it doesn't need an airport to land at.
Yeah.
That's or anything with infrastructure.
So getting back to the business model, am I right to understand that then the idea is to operate a fleet of airships to carry cargo? What sort of missions you have in mind? You plan to be an operator like an airline, basically.
So we are an operator like an airline, exactly that, sitting between the manufacturer on the one side and the end-use customer on the other side. So we've looked at a huge number of markets, Miguel, but we consider to be the attributes, particularly of the Lockheed designed airship, to be very suitable, as Jim's just highlighted, for carrying heavy loads, cargo and freight, particularly to remote parts of the world which don't have access to existing transport infrastructure. So we alleviate the need to build roads or rail links into areas that don't have them already. We don't need runways to operate from. So it really is a uniquely capable ship when you take that ability to operate significantly heavy and with the ACLS systems. Now, there are other ships out there that service other markets, but we believe that this is a real game changer in terms of how we connect parts of the world that are not connected. And that may be commercial freight and cargo. It may be humanitarian missions, disaster relief, aid programs. We've got some great relationships with agencies around the world, including the UN. But it's also good for surveillance and survey because of its capacity to stay on station for prolonged periods of time. And when you look at all of those things together, we believe that there's a significant market for the hybrid airship, particularly the hybrid airship that's been designed by Lockheed. Now, we're not ruling out others, and other people may come along, and other people may have airships that are very suitable for other markets. I mean, Kelly with their unmanned airship are looking more on the survey surveillance side of things, which is great. But the work that we've done over the last 8, 9, 10 years, and our relationships with people all over the world suggests that there's a great demand for that remote connectivity, and doing it in a way that minimizes the environmental impact. So it minimizes the environmental impact because we don't burn as much fuel. So from an operating perspective, it's a much greener aircraft. It's cheaper to operate, but also we don't need the environmental damage caused by construction. So we take away all the problems of permitting roads and around, whether you're looking at the north of Canada or Alaska, whether you're looking at the Amazon region, whether you're looking at Southeast Asia and Africa. A large part of the world is not connected by traditional forms of transport and suffers as a result. The UN has identified it as one of the major detriments to economic growth, and we believe the airship is a tool to help promote sustainable economic growth without the environmental damage that would otherwise be caused by other forms of transportation.
Understood. How are you planning to roll this out? Are you planning to have this, let's say, airship airline based somewhere? Is it going to be a global operator? What's the idea when it comes to implementing this idea, this vision?
Good question. I mean, we have a network of partners already established around the world in what we see as key markets. And we are in discussion with many tens of potential end-use customers who see a requirement for the ship. What we're not really aiming to do is put ships into areas of the world speculatively. So it will be based on specific customer demand that we've identified already, and other customers, I'm sure, that will come to our notice over time. But we have the one thing that we're certain of is there's no shortage of demand for the airship in many parts of the world. So the problem will be picking the customers to service in the early part of the deployment. because there'll be a limited production in the first instance. So we've got demand from customers that way exceeds the production capacity of the manufacturer.
Okay, so I've got a few questions. First of all, certification. Under what regulation would this aircraft, this airship, operate? Is there a specific section in the regulations that is for airships? Does this apply to the sort of cargo operations that you are envisaging here?
The airship is going to be certified under the FAA. Lockheed Martin, when they were designing and building, they produced a design criteria that was approved by the FAA. So that outlines all the requirements specifying the design.
Would you be able to operate in all these, let's say, remote areas in places like Africa or Asia, Latin America, with an FAA certification, or you would need each of the specific countries you're planning to operate in to also certify this aircraft?
That is specifically dependent on the country in question.
Mm-hmm.
Most countries recognize the FAA
Okay.
or the CAA body of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And as Mike mentioned, we had operated in over 19 countries, and we obtained permissions with the aviation authorities of those countries to operate. It was either under the FAA or the CAA. If we went into a country that their main body of regulation was fashioned after the CAA, there would be a way to comply with those regulations. The FAA have an international certification office that would deal with that. And so there were several instances where we had to type certify the aircraft in the country we went to. There's a process of how we can deploy this aircraft. And it's basically if you think about it, the aviation regulations are all about safety and security.
Yeah.
And a lot of the regulations are very similar. And so the FAA International Office helps get through those obstacles.
Okay.
And that's part of our skill set. So as Mike was just saying, in operating airships in 35 odd countries and balloons in a lot more than that, we are very experienced in taking new aircraft and working with the aviation authorities of those countries. I mean, Jim has spent many hundreds, if not thousands, of hours with aviation authorities from Australia through to Canada, through to Brazil, and then into Asia, in Hong Kong and China. So it's part of our skill set that we have the relevant experience and understand how to work with aviation authorities. And it's not just the aircraft. So the aircraft needs certifying, but also the operations need to be approved and structured in a way that are compliant with local regulations. And pilots and mechanics need to be trained and qualified and have their qualifications recognized. So it's kind of three tiers, three layers of qualification that we need. But I don't want to pick out any countries in particular, but I think you probably, I don't know, was it Singapore you spent the longest time, probably?
Singapore and Hong Kong. But I mean, having said that, we were able to comply, we were able to get in, and we were able to operate successfully for our clients. So we don't really see that as a major obstruction to our ability to expand.
And in fact, in both, I think, Singapore, in the case of Singapore and Hong Kong, the main concern was the airship navigating within congested airspace, because you've got major international airports that control most, if not all, of the airspace. So going out and operating in remote parts of the world, which are relatively depopulated, is less of a concern to aviation authorities than it would be working in congested airspace. Having said that, we flew in and out of LAX in the international airport in Los Angeles. So that I think Mike made that point earlier on, that the airships are fully capable
I wanted to ask you about that, actually, about the multimodality. I guess to carry cargo, it's important to be able to connect with other modes of transportation. How is this cargo going to be carried in the aircraft? Is it going to be like a standard container? What sort of what amount, what volume and weight are we talking about?
Okay.
How multimodal is it going to be, connecting with other modes of transportation, either by ship or by road or by train, etc.?
Good question. So the cargo bay is 60 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet, or just over. It will take 3 standard ISO containers, but it will have the ability to, you could load vehicles in there, you can load things on.
Because it's not on a mooring mast, and it's not moving.
And it's been designed as a back of the sky in that sense. So very flexible in terms of its payload. We're talking to people about putting mobile hospital units in containers and moving around. So there's it's a very, very, very flexible space which can be used for a whole range of different applications. And in terms of connectivity, it's a very good question. And one of the great strengths of the airship is that it kind of breaks away from that intermodal transport model. It can fly directly A to B. That's why we're called Straighline Aviation. We can go straight from the whether it's a mine straight through to the market. We don't need to operate, as we've said already, in an airport. So we can actually operate from greenfield sites. If we're working for a customer, we can deliver and pick up, close to and directly with the areas that we need to service, rather than having to onload and offload at ports or at other airports. And that's one of the strengths. That's not to say we wouldn't do it or can't do it, and there will be times that we will deliver into nodes, say in Canada, where the roads only go so far up, or the rail only goes so far up the country. We can deliver back to those folks, but by and large, we alleviate the bottlenecks, or help to alleviate bottlenecks in the transport network that otherwise exist.
Is there an optimal range? Is there like a sweet spot where moving things by airship beats other modes of transportation?
Yeah, I mean there is. We plan to fly it non-stop around the world, so it could be configured for a very long flight. But in terms of day-to-day operations, we talk about a maximum range around 1,400 nautical miles from a practical and operational perspective, which means that it's got a much greater range than helicopters, but has a lot of the similar attributes that a helicopter would have. Plus, it's a lot safer and greener. Anything sub 1,400 nautical miles, you start building in inefficiencies if the route distance is too short, because your turnaround time starts taking up an increasing proportion of the day, of the operational day. But it's designed, the airship's been designed to operate 24 hours a day, and running average type operations backwards and forwards in that sort of over across that kind of distance.
That was a very good question, Miguel. Thanks for that. It's an important question.
No problem. Let's talk about the costs and revenue. What is the sort of capex you need to get one of these airships, and what sort of operational cost are we talking about? How does it compare with other alternatives? And by alternatives, I'm thinking particularly in the case scenario that you mentioned in remote areas, which I think this is where the airship brings a number of capabilities that are absent right now, but also compared to other modes of transportation in, let's say, a more easy environment where you have alternatives.
Yeah. So it typically we are more expensive than road or rail or sea freight connections where they exist. So that's one of the reasons why we won't target with this size of airship markets where there's already established infrastructure. The larger airship, the next derivative up at 100 tons, will start to compete in a cost per ton mile with those things, with those types of transportation. So In comparison with other aviation, we're significantly cheaper than fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft in terms of the operational cost. So maybe a fifth or even up to a tenth the cost, mainly down to the fuel burn and maintenance issues and costs. But it's difficult to make a direct comparison. The big saving is in not requiring the high capital expenditure. So again, where existing routes don't exist, aren't present, then removing the need for capex, whether it's building an airport or whether it's building road or rail connections, is huge. One example, which was an oil and gas company operating in Australasia, spent $900 million on building a landing strip to fly Antonovs in and out of, and they calculated if in total for the project in total, rather than that 900+ million, it would have cost about 27 million if the airships had been available to them. So it would have saved over $900 million if the airships. So that gives you an idea, just using one project as an example.
What would be those 27 millions for? Is it
just for the flight cost of the aircraft? So flying
Okay.
the aircraft in and out to do the job that they required. Is what we costed in there, and the same would be the case. I mean, if you look at northern Canada and Alaska, the cost of building ice roads gets higher and higher every year. The ice road season is more and more unreliable. Now down to 4 to 6 weeks in many parts. We've talked to people who said they may well not have an ice road season, and so obviously this puts projects at risk, existing projects. And prevents new projects being undertaken. The airship is significantly cheaper, and we can operate, 10 and a half, 11 months a year, so we don't have the seasonality that you associate with ice roads or barging or other things.
What about the reliability in the face of challenging weather? I mean, you mentioned Alaska, northern Canada. Even in the tropics, you can have pretty big tropical storms, hurricanes, and all of that. So
I'll let Jim. Sorry, you carry on, Miguel.
No, just I'm curious about that. I mean, because I had this idea that airships were kind of very sensitive to weather conditions.
I'll let Jim answer in terms of technicality, but just to give you an overview, Jim and I have studied a lot of places around the world, and we haven't come across an area where we couldn't operate. And in most areas where we talk to people and they say, oh gosh, it's very windy, or it's very this, or it's very that. When you dig down into the data, the weather limitations for this particular type of airship are considerably less than one would otherwise imagine. But Jim, I'll let you talk a bit more about the specifics.
Well, the airships are very robust with respect to weather. There are certain types of weather, thunderstorms and such, that you avoid. All aircraft avoid thunderstorm activity, but the other types of weather that you'd encounter, I mentioned the airships are certified for day-night VFR, IFR, so we can fly in zero visibility. We have the instrumentation, the pilots are trained to operate in that type of environment. In the 50s, the U.S. Navy, they operated airships for a very long time, up through 1962. And to prove the capability of the airship, they conducted an exercise called Operation Hull Gale. And that was it took place in the Northeast of the United States in the wintertime, and it was during a winter blizzard conditions. And they were supposed to go out and support a fleet exercise offshore. And for that program, the airships were the only aircraft flying at one point in freezing conditions, icing conditions. They were all non-rigid airships, but I think it just is testimony to the robustness of the airship itself.
And I think that's a good point, Jim. And it's a very powerful example. And we've also had conversations with people, and unfortunately, flying up in particularly mountainous regions in Alaska and elsewhere can be very hazardous when visibility reduces. And there are a number of incidents and accidents and fatalities caused by that every year. The airship has a great ability to stop, so you can stay stationary if all else fails. On top of everything else, it's a much safer aircraft to operate than many other aircraft in those areas.
So you mean it would be stationary in the air?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if there are strong winds, doesn't it make it worse? I mean, if you stop moving, you're left at the mercy of the elements. No?
Well, it's relative. I've been flying in strong winds where I've been at full power going into the wind, and I've been going backwards around 10 miles an hour. But that's a temporary event. You can change altitude to get different wind conditions. So that's one of the things that we do is we use altitude to help take advantage of adverse wind conditions.
Okay.
We're also flight planning, and we know where we need to go, and we get good weather forecasts because the weather forecasting is really good these days. And I think it's safe to say that in finding yourself in a condition where you cannot safely conduct a flight is pretty rare.
And just to be clear, Miguel, when we talk about being stationary, we are still under power, so we're still in control of the aircraft.
Okay.
It's not we haven't switched the power off and stay stationary that way. The aircraft's got vector thrust, so we can take off and land vertically. We can manage that and manage the climatic conditions accordingly.
Another way to look at it is if you're flying into a 20-knot wind, you match that wind speed with your airspeed. So the wind's at 20 knots, your airspeed's 20 knots, you're flying directly into the wind, your ground speed is 0.
Okay.
You're not over the ground.
They cancel each other out. So if the airships have all these many advantages, why they fell out of favor? I mean, they were a thing in the 1920s. Then after the war, I mean, you mentioned you obviously operated most of those that were left. But it became a very niche type of aircraft. And now all of a sudden there seems to be a renewed interest in airships. So why they fell out of favor? And why it's possible now that we may have a comeback? Is it because of all this new technology, new designs that you mentioned, or are there other underlying factors here?
Yeah, I mean,
that's a great question.
In terms of why now, you're right. It's the technology and the technology advancements that we've outlined, but also the push towards more environmental forms of transport, particularly in aviation. Aircraft that burn less in the way of fossil fuels, and the airship, by the way, is very much on the path to zero net emissions and through to zero emissions aviation, because we don't have limitations that fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft have. Real pathway to much more environmentally sustainable form of aviation.
But it seems that at some point the airships became a bit of a rarity. As you mentioned, you were using them for advertising, but not for things like, for example, these cargo remote missions. Why they were left aside and not used for those missions, for example? Because the technology, even if in a more primitive form, the technology, the main principles were known. They have been known for many decades, for 100 years, more than 100 years. So why they were not being used for this type of missions? And I'm assuming if there had been an interest, there would have been more investment as well that would have brought forward all these advances as well in time.
You're really asking why in the 20s the airships failed.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the 20s, I mean, we all know there was the very famous Hindenburg incident in New Jersey, right? I mean, we all have those images in our mind, but we all have seen the footage. But then in the decades after that, after the war, I mean, the technology was there. Why it was not used more widely for all these missions, like carrying cargo to remote outposts, using them in areas that that
Well,
don't.
I think Miguel, it was the advent of the blimp rather than the large aircraft. Jim, you were a bit of an expert at that. So
It's a good question, Miguel.
all his questions are good. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. In my opinion, is that the airships have never done cargo before because of their inherent instability on the ground. You're not able to stabilize the airship, a conventional airship, on the ground enough to be able to load and unload a massive amount of cargo.
Okay, so we needed to wait for this Lockheed Martin project.
Yeah.
The air cushion system makes the difference because with that system, you can operate at your maximum static heaviness over the field. You can hover and taxi around the field. So you can load it in one area and then maneuver to your takeoff area and take off and depart. You can land and then taxi back to your loading area. But all of the other conventional airships have mooring masts, and they have a mobile mast that comes out to the ship and takes them to a secure area, or they don't, and you have to land and maneuver that ship in a optimum static weight safely back to the mooring mast. There's an element of risk involved with that.
A large element of risk.
A lot of airships have been lost on the ground.
It was necessary then for this hybrid technology to come into play to be able to conceive these other uses for the aircraft. But still, there was a kind of a decades-long gap there. Why it took so long? I mean, we are talking from the late 30s all the way to the 2000s. So it's quite a long time.
Airships are flying quite successfully. The U.S. Navy operated a fleet of airships up to 1962. The reason that they canceled their flight operation is because the advent of the satellite and the nuclear submarine.
Okay.
It basically negated their mission. So the airships no longer had a mission, but they were operating them quite successfully and safely.
Yeah.
For aerial surveillance, anti-submarine warfare, reconnaissance, that type of mission. But the commercial advertising airships, it was a natural fit. Goodyear pioneered that. We excelled at it with our fleet, the 19 airships. But the why there was never an emphasis on cargo and doing some utility work with airships. I think that will always remain a mystery, but I think in large part it was due to the instability of the conventional airships.
Yeah, I mean, if you think, and you'll have seen the pictures of the old airships with ground crew of tens and hundreds of people, on nose lines, holding the ship down, and bringing it to a mast and then tying it off to a mast. And even then it moves around and it pivots up and down. And as Jim said, that's not a practical solution. So a lot of people have thought about a lot of different designs to solve that problem. And it wasn't until the late 90s when an engineer came up with a workable solution.
No, I was surprised that no one had been investing in that. I mean, like we went to the moon, launched supersonic airliners, but no one thought about perfecting a concept that already existed.
Well, people did. In the 90s, you had Cargo Lifter in Germany, who had big plans to develop heavy lift airships, and they thought they had a solution, which didn't work. Practically, it didn't work, and they spent a lot of money. You probably know the hangar site south of Berlin, which I think is still the largest single span building in Europe, certainly. And they failed to come up with a workable design. I'm sure there are other airship designers out there who are also working and spending a lot of money building airships where they haven't got a practical, commercial, workable design. So, these things are not, appear easy once you see the solution, but finding that solution is often harder.
Question to ask: if anyone's looking at airships, they need to ask themselves, well, how are they going to stabilize it to conduct the cargo exchange and the ballasting exchange on the ground? That's the key. that one with the ACLS system is the answer.
Okay, understood. In terms of making this a reality, all this fleet of airships, how much money you need to do that? And are you VC funded? How you plan to finance this plan?
Yeah, I mean, we are VC funded. We're backed by a number of VCs. We're backed by a number of high net worths and family offices, as well as by our strategic partners around the world. We actually, as an operator, we don't need a huge amount of funding to get into service. We have offers of debt finance to help fund the aircraft themselves, but our working capital requirement to grow the fleet is not significant. And as I said to you earlier, it is not our intention to place airships into service speculatively. So we'll do it off the back of firm customer demand. The manufacturers are well supported. AT² is some heritage at Lockheed. They've already spent a large amount of money getting the airship to where it is now, as Jim said. Type design approval by the FAA. And the certification plan approved by the FAA. So they're a long way down the line. They've already spent north of $100 million getting to this point. So again, unlike a lot of other airship manufacturers, the money's been spent, and it is a significant amount of money. Certifying any aircraft is an expensive business. So we're pleased that those funds have already been invested. And again, it's another reason why we have confidence that the Lockheed design will come to market first and come to market in a way that services the customer requirements that we see.
As Mark said earlier, if any other company or airship designer come up with a solution, then we'd be happy to work with them, but we don't see that on the horizon at the moment. Unfortunately, we'd love to have other airships apart from the Lockheed Martin airship that we could buy, but we don't see any other developer at this time developing a operationally safe and environmentally kind method of moving freight.
What time frame are we talking about if everything goes according to plan?
We're looking at 2.5 years from here to the aircraft being certified. That's something in that time frame, 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay. And then the plan is to build up a fleet of how many and over what period of time?
I mean, it's an ultimately totally scalable business. So if the customer demand is there, then we will carry on buying aircraft and deploying them into service. There is a limited supply in the first instance, talking about manufacturing 6 aircraft a year, rising up to 12, and then going on from there. But as I mentioned earlier, we see a demand already well in excess of that, and we've not really gone out proactively into the market to stimulate more demand because we just don't need to. We get inbound calls and emails every week from people who are interested in what the airship's capable of doing and how it will help solve problems that they see in the real world. So I think it's got a massive future. There have been a number of independent studies suggesting a requirement for over 500 airships globally. We don't think that's even scratching the surface. I mean, the number of customers that we talk to who themselves require multiple airships, regions of the world where we've had conversations where numbers of 20, 30, 40 airships have been mentioned just to service those areas. So there's more than enough work out there. There's more than enough for us to target and grow a substantial business.
Just before you ask the next question, just to make it plain that certification is 2.5 years, but we don't need a certified aircraft to fly around the world non-stop, which we intend to do. You don't need that done experimentally.
Tell me more about this. So you're planning to fly around the world in an airship?
Yes, it's on our website actually, Miguel. But basically, we've been involved in some pretty large projects in the light of the air industry with Richard, as you know, trying to fly around the world, and I was always the project leader on those. So we're familiar with big projects, but our aim is to fly around the world, and we've done a lot of work on this, non-stop, unrefueled, at net zero emissions, and we can do that before we move into the the certification program will be going along all the time, but we don't need to complete it before we fly around the world. It's going to take us between 15 and 20 days, and we've been working, working out the route, which we don't really want to talk about because of the political situation yet, but there's 2 or 3 viable routes to do that. 8 people on board, and it's going to be a great project.
Interesting. And you have a set date for this? Not yet. Isn't this time frame like 2.5 years, but not clear when exactly?
No, it all depends on it depends on a lot of things, but raising the cash to do it is one of them. But we certainly don't need to raise enough cash to take us through the certification program. That's the point I'm trying to make, and it will be a revenue generating exercise as well, like most of the major flights that we've done, across the Atlantic Pacific.
Okay. And where can people learn more about, not just about this around the world flight, but also about the overall project and your ideas, bringing airship cargo transportation to many regions of the world? Is there a website you could recommend or other social media channels that people can check?
We have a website, which is straightlinaviation.com. We also put out regular updates on LinkedIn. People are welcome to track us down on LinkedIn and join and follow us. And of course, to email or to pick up the phone, we're always happy to chat with people.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here today on the podcast, sharing insights about this very exciting project. I wish you all the best with these endeavors and really looking forward to seeing these airships flying around at some point in the next few years.
You should make sure that you're one of the first people to fly in it. You should. And,
hopefully. If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can, of course, subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's ALLPLANE.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.